It's great. We are live. Hello, everybody.
Oh, I'm muted. Again, we were just saying, how many years have we done Zoom? Can't figure it out. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writers to Watch. I'm Lainey Mays.
And I'm Grace Caternolo.
Grace Caternolo in the house. And we make up the library marketing team at HarperCollins, and we have a really fantastic night for you. This is going to be crazy good. We have a lot of books to talk about, a lot of great authors who have joined, taken the time to come and talk to all of the librarians listening, and we can't wait. So thank you for joining us. Grace, is there anything we need to remind them of before we start?
I don't think so, but if you want to stay tuned, I mean, you should stay tuned to the end anyway, but we will also be revealing next month's Writers to Watch lineup, which we're really excited about. If you were at Galley Gab Fest yesterday, you know, but you should stick around.
There's still surprises to come.
Yeah.
Do you want to remind them about things that any perks you get for being a Crowdcast member?
Yeah, so if you're registered on Crowdcast, you probably already know, but if the e-galleys for the books that we are talking about are available early, we will send them to you ahead of time so you can download right on NetGalley, pre-approved, and then you can enjoy the books before we chat. It makes for a better conversation. So yeah, that's definitely a perk to registering on Crowdcast, and I'm gonna throw the Edelweiss catalog in the chats right now.
Thank you, Grace.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Edelweiss catalog, you can find all information about books, and when e-galleys are up, that's where you'll find them as well. So stay tuned. And I think we're ready to kind of get started. I think that's pretty much everything. Don't forget to stay and hear all the exciting announcements. So without further ado, I hand over to Grace Caternolo.
Thank you. I am so excited to welcome Daniel M. Lavery to the virtual stage. Hi, thank you for being here. We're so excited to talk to you about meeting new people. I don't know if I've enjoyed a protagonist so much in my entire life. I loved Barbara. I could spend all day with her and did. And I hope that everybody loves her as much as I do. But before I have you tell everybody about Barbara and her story, I'm going to read a quick bio. So Daniel M. Lavery is a former Dear Prudence advice columnist at Slate, the co-founder of The Toast, and the New York Times bestselling author of Text from Jane Eyre, The Merry Spinster, Something That May Shock and Discredit You, Women's Hotel, and Christmas at the Women's Hotel. He also writes the popular newsletter, The Shatner. So we're really excited to have you here. And without further ado, tell everybody about meeting new people.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's funny that you mentioned this earlier as something that might happen if we were asked to describe books that we're reading right now, but this is actually happening to me about the book I wrote, which is I've now forgotten everything that happens in that book. I'm dimly aware of the fact that I must have written it, but it might take a moment for my memory of what happens in it to come back online. This started, I do remember, as a sort of threat that I made to my agent and editor, which was that I wanted to write my sort of own pastiche of Nora Ephron's Heartburn, which is one of my favorite books. And I'm always trying to think about ways to sort of get away with not worrying too much about a plot, but trying to figure out how can I write a book that is mostly spending time with a chatty and embittered person, and yet in a way that feels exciting and fun and like you want to spend more time with them and not like you're just listening to a sort of like uninteresting rant. So that was the sort of genesis for it. And then thinking, a phrase that I hear people say all the time is, friendship breakups are harder than romantic breakups, and we don't know how to talk about it. And everybody says this. So I remember at a certain point feeling like everybody says we don't know how to talk about this, but we're all talking about it. And I find that sort of alignment really interesting, and thinking about the ways that people bring certain expectations to bear when it comes to friendships, especially, the sort of quote unquote idea of women's friendships. And so thinking about, something between Nora Ephron's Heartburn and like an out of season A Christmas Carol. Like I knew I wanted not exactly like in Tiny Tim who did not die, but like a sort of moment of like, I do want this person to be put in the path of like a remarkable and unexpected sort of personal transformation. But then I think kind of trying to figure out how do you make someone both very difficult but also interesting and compelling. And then if you don't make them so off-putting that people are turned away at the beginning, how do you then transform them without sacrificing the things that make them like sharp, unique, memorable, different? So it's sort of shepherding this woman in her mid-60s who works at a very, very upscale like grocery store in a very like shishi part of New York, who has been pretty for her at least, out of left field, dumped by her best friend when she was planning on making them both dinner, and then tries to sort of figure out, well, what's gone wrong? Because I don't care about getting divorced. I don't really care about my other relationships. I care about having a best friend. And yet every time I've gotten one, it's ended badly. And I need to figure out if the next one's going to just repeat the cycle because I can't get dumped again in my 70s. Like I cannot keep doing this. It is humiliating. And so that sort of kicks off the story from there.
I love that we are talking about friendship breakups because I always think like you should be able to call and work if you get friendship dumped. And this book, the opening pages were like almost traumatizing to read because it's like, oh, it was so painfully relatable to I think many people. And I think you did a great job at creating a protagonist that has all these quirks and oddities, and that sometimes you're like, but you really care about her. And I just really love this book. And I know librarians are going to as well. And I have questions for you, but I'll hold them until everybody's back on. But thank you so much, Danny.
Thanks.
I'll pass it off to Lainey.
Hi, I would like to welcome on screen Christina Baker Kline from Rome. Hello. Oh, there you go.
Unmuted. Hello. Great to be here. Hi, how are you?
Good. So good to see you.
Great
And
to see you.
I'm so excited to hear more. I'm going to do a bio and then I can't wait. We have so many great things in store. So, okay, Christina Baker Kline is the author of 10 novels, including the #1 New York Times bestseller Orphan Train. Her novels have received the New England Society Book Award for Fiction and the Maine Literary Award, among other prizes, and are published in 40 countries. Born in England, she was raised in the American South and Maine, and she lives in New York and Maine. And your book, The Foursome, will be out May 12th.
Yeah.
And I'm that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to hand it over, but we have some lovely slides, so I'm going to get them ready.
Thank you, Lainey. I'm so excited to talk about this book. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to just go through these slides with you guys because the story that I'm telling is so compelling, but I think it's even more interesting in a way when you can see the actual flesh and blood people who are behind the story. So this is my new novel, The Foursome, which tells the story of two sisters in rural North Carolina in the 19th century who married two brothers who happened to be among the most famous people in the world. They were the original Siamese twins, as they called themselves, Chang and Eng Bunker. So many of us have heard of Chang and Eng from the Guinness Book of World Records. These men were athletic, whip-smart immigrants to America who were joined by a narrow band of cartilage just below their ribs, and they were never separated in their lifetimes. But I came to know them in a more personal way through family lore. Chang and Eng married my distant relatives, Sarah and Adelaide Yates. So this is a picture of the brothers with their wives and with some of the children that they ended up having. So we can go to the next one. Their father, David Yates, and my ancestor, Elizabeth Yates, were siblings. My mother's entire family is from North Carolina, where the Bunkers settled in 1839. So Chang and Eng were 28 years old. They were incredibly charismatic, handsome, famous, very wealthy, from exhibiting themselves all over the world when they decided to retire from showbiz and become gentlemen farmers in North Carolina. They had fallen in love with the area when they visited a doctor who'd come to one of their shows in New York, and he invited them to hunt and fish on his property. North Carolina, they said, reminded them of their fishing village in Siam, now Thailand, where they were born and raised. And I think you can see why in these photos of rural Thailand and northwestern North Carolina. They bought 150 acres in Wilkes County. They built a house and opened a general store. And they told the press that now all they needed to complete their lives were wives and children. Very scandalous, as you might imagine. But they, in fact, did exactly that. On April 13th, 1843, they married Adelaide and Sarah Yates, again, my fourth great aunts, on their family estate in Wilkesboro. 1 year later, within the space of a week, each couple had a baby girl. By all accounts, the brothers were devoted fathers to their children. This is kind of an incredible document. This is showing the 21 children that they eventually had. Eng and Sarah had 11 children, and Chang and Addie had 10. They also went back on the road many times over the years. Here's a poster on the left from an earlier, sort of when they were in their 30s or 40s. And then the one on the right, as you can see, they have gray hair at this point. And they took some of their children on tour with them over the years. Here they are with one from each family. Even when they were on tour with P.T. Barnum and his traveling circus, they loathed P.T. Barnum, but they took their children with them on tour with him when they ran out of money after the Civil War. So everything about this story is fascinating. It has tons of twists and turns. And for a long time, I didn't know how to take this material from history and from my own family stories and tell a novel, write a novel about it. But I stumbled on one detail in my research that gave me a way in. So the Bunker sibling, the twins, along with one of the wives, Sarah, are buried in the graveyard of a church they built for the community on their property called White Plains Baptist. And in fact, is a family reunion of their descendants. At that church, you can see the graveyard in the backyard. But Eng's wife, Sarah, pictured here with one of her children, chose to be buried separately when she died in 1892 on her own property a mile away among formerly enslaved people and the children who died before her. For many years, her grave was unmarked. Eventually, a stone was erected that fell into disrepair, and recently her descendants have restored it. So, as Carrie Bradshaw says, I had to wonder, why would Sarah choose to separate herself from her husband and sister in death? The foursome is my novelistic answer to that question. It took me 5 years to write, and it was definitely a labor of love. And I hope you'll all enjoy the story. So thank you.
Oh my goodness. You know, librarians love multimedia, and I know that they were just like salivating at all those photos because I went on the longest Google rabbit hole. Like I was like, wait, what happened? I thought it was just this story stayed with me so much longer after I read it, and not to mention this like wild story that is in history. But I think your like the parallels of this country going through war and this house internal politics, like it was just so beautiful. And those meditations on motherhood and sisterhood, it was really beautiful.
Well, there are so many surprises. The whole thing is sort of unbelievable. It's never happened before or since. So far, at least, Chang and Eng are the only conjoined twins who've ever had children. Also, by the way, no conjoined twins are conjoined in the same way, so everyone is different. But the whole thing was crazy to do, and I hope I did it justice. But
Yeah, no,
it was quite, as I said, quite an undertaking.
I mean, it's beautiful set against history that feels not so far away in some themes. I wondered if you could talk quickly about Grace and Grace's story intertwined with this, because I thought that was so fascinating, and I loved that and the parallels of like what's happening in the country. during the book?
Yeah. So Grace was an enslaved woman who lived on one of the sisters' properties. And I had read and sort of heard, I've talked to many family members, but also many historians about her role in the family. And there was also some question about whether she had children who were, half white. And so delving into her character and looking at her role in the household, and then later when she was a freed woman, what she chose to do in real life, and then in the story I created as well. I mean, the fiction writing I do that's set in the past, I want to be it's fairly accurate, but also, of course, it's a novel. And I'm writing from the perspective of one of the sisters who sort of was a renegade. And so, I'm exploring these subjects at the same time that our country is going through a lot of division as well at this moment. So there's no way I could say that I wasn't influenced by what's going on. And, I'll just end by saying Hilary Mantel said that she writes fiction, she writes contemporary fiction set in the past. And I love that description. I think you can't enter writing about the past as someone living today without grappling with where we are at the moment. So
Wow.
anyway, so
Beautiful
yeah, thank
said.
you.
Yeah. Okay. I want to urge everyone to go to your website because there's behind the book there. So I'll put that in the chat
Thank
too.
you.
But okay, so we'll see you in a little bit. Thank
Okay,
you so
wonderful.
much.
Thank you, Lainey.
Right. And hello, Daniel. How are you?
Great to be here. Very happy to be here. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk to you about Stealing George Washington. So I'm going to read a quick bio. Daniel Stone is a national best-selling author on adventure, history, and science. He is a former senior editor for National Geographic and a former White House correspondent for Newsweek. His first book, The Food Explorer, was a national bestseller. He is also the author of Sinkable, about shipwrecks in the deep sea, and American Poison, about a woman who waged a David and Goliath fight against the auto industry in the 1920s. He teaches environmental science, history, and storytelling at Johns Hopkins University. He is an award-winning historian and a distinguished fellow at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. It is such a treat to have you here. I love any time I get to read a book about history, and this was no different. So I'm gonna pass it off to you because we have a ton of really cool visuals as well.
Great. Thank you, Grace, and thank you, Lanny, for hosting, and thank you all for joining. I think my book has the distinction tonight of being the only nonfiction book. I write history, narrative history, and I love plucking characters and moments from pivotal moments in time and try to show how these contributed to a transformed world. This book is coming out this summer. I'm very excited about it because it's about a heist from the Library of Congress. It's all about libraries and the transformation of not only the nation's biggest library, but what it meant to be a library and what a library's goal and focus was to be at this pivotal time in the 1890s. The story braids three main narratives, and I'll tell you all about three of them. The first is this man. His name is Ainsworth Spofford, great name of the 19th century, who had the honor of being the Librarian of Congress, appointed by Abraham Lincoln, back when the Library of Congress was still in the Capitol building. Next slide, you could see the actual library as it was. It was very beautiful, but very overcrowded. For more than 50 years, it ran out of space. And such is the plight and the nature of probably libraries everywhere, that to make room for things that are valuable and endlessly not have enough room. So it's the story of the library and as it changed and transformed. It's also the story of a heist, and this is the second narrative, of two young men who worked in the library who exploited this overcrowding, this seam of history when the library was stretched beyond its limits. And at the time, the library was holding almost all of the valuable American archives, including the relics from the American Revolution. This included letters and journals and diaries and archives in general from George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. and this era that really gave birth and became lionized a century later in the birth story of the country. Go to the next slide. Um, George Washington's archives were the heart of the library's holdings, the most valuable things that the Library of Congress held, including his diary collection. George Washington was famous for keeping diaries almost his entire life, from when he was a young soldier in the 1740s all the way up till when he died in 1799. So more than 50 years of diaries. He wrote things down. But there was one diary that was singular above all else. Next slide. And this was the diary he kept during the Constitutional Convention in the spring and summer of 1787. During the drafting of the Constitution in Philadelphia, George Washington keeps a diary. This is it. I've seen it, which hopefully doesn't give away too much of the ending of the book. But this diary and a few other archives are stolen in this dramatic fashion from the library when no one's really paying attention, including the chief librarian. It kicks off a elaborate hunt for the thieves, a interstate hunt and chase for them, and a wild media trial of 1897. It's a very riveting story. It's all true. It's based on more than maybe 800 sources and counting. It's sort of endless, but it's a very rich and riveting story that embodies not just the library, but also the time that this existed in. This is coming out this summer, also in time, in hopes to align with the 250th anniversary of the country, which will probably and likely reflect a lot of attention on 1776 and 1787, when those kind of birthing documents were formed based on the relics and the archives at the center of this story. Next slide. The third strand of the braid in this story is the building of the modern Library of Congress, which is taking place at the exact same time. I mentioned the library in the Capitol was completely overstretched, and so a new library starts to be built in the early 1890s. This is one of my favorite photos of the book because it shows the literal footprint and the foundation of a library that would hold an unlimited number of books in the future, and the Capitol right behind where the hole in the ground is. So you want to sit with us? Here's my son. You can see the whole Capitol in the building behind the hole in the ground. Next slide. And here's the laying of the cornerstone. So I follow the building of the library as a character in itself. And if you've ever seen Ken, could see you. If you've ever seen Ken Follett, if you've ever read Pillars of the Earth about building a cathedral, I try to follow a similar style of building a library. Not just the structural masonry of building a library, but the considerations of holding an enormous amount of weight, of making room for a limitless amount of books and other material over a long period of time. Next slide. This included great innovations, including this tunnel on the left side of carrying books back and forth through the tunnel. And on the right, great innovation in stacks, what stacks meant and how stacks were their own sort of innovation at the time in the 1890s. We don't think of stacks as sort of their own structure. We think of them as holding, books, but they were their own innovation for libraries. Next slide, I think last slide. And then the book kind of finishes off with the heist and with the opening of what we now know as the Thomas Jefferson Building of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. This great, beautiful reading room. I have some amazing illustrations like this in the book. Next slide. And of course, capping off with the library as we know it today, it's an exploration of today's library. This whole notion that it's a library that is supposed to contain everything ever published, the burden of that, the extreme demands of that are endless, right? Okay, that are endless, and how the library adapts and continues to evolve in our modern era too. So a story about libraries, a librarian, and a singular item at the heart of its collection.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and hello to our
This is
special
Micah,
guest.
age 4.
Hello.
Yeah.
That was so wonderful, and thank you so much for the visuals. I always say you can't really spoil history. You've had how much time to learn about it. So I don't think you spoiled the ending at all. And the way you write is so narratively beautiful. It's very atmospheric. So thank you so much. And we have questions for you in a minute, and I'm gonna pass it back off to Lainey.
Thank you.
Bye. I'm so glad we had someone join us. That was really great. And I have to say, seeing the Library of Congress in person, we had an ALA in DC, and it was just, I mean, this is your audience, right? Like, we're so reverent of it, but seeing it in person is like a whole other thing. It was
I
great.
always tell people the Library of Congress is the best building in Washington. Everyone goes to the Smithsonian's and the Air and Space. If you're in Washington, you've never been, it is incredible, jaw-dropping.
We went for like the 100th or whatever anniversary of women's suffrage, and so they had a whole thing on that. It was really cool. So thank you so much for sharing those photos, and story is so interesting.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Talk to you in a minute. Okay, I'm gonna introduce Francine Prose, if you'll come on screen.
Video.
Hi.
Hi. Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks.
Good. I'm so happy to have you here, and I know librarians are super excited to hear about the
I
new
just got
book.
kicked. Oh, I'm so sorry, Lee. I just got kicked out of the Zoom. Let me see if I can get back in.
Well, I can see you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
We're good to go.
perfect. As long as you can see and we can hear you, but I want you to be able to see us. So thank you for being here. I'm going to do an intro, and then I'm going to hand it over. So let me get your lovely cover. We were just talking about how much we love this cover, and read your bio. Francine Prose is the author of 22 works of fiction, including the New York Times bestseller Lovers at the Chameleon Club, Paris, 1932, and A Changed Man, which won the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, and Blue Angel, which was a finalist for the National Book Award, and highly praised nonfiction, including 1974, A Personal History, and New York Times bestseller Reading Like a Writer, which has become a classic, and the recipient of numerous grants and honors, including a Guggenheim and Fulbright, a Director's Fellow at the Center for Scholars and Writers at the New York Public Library. Prose is a former president of PEN American Center, a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And you're a distinguished writer in residence at Bard College. And I can't wait to hear more about 5 Weeks in the Country, which comes out May 5th. So I'm going to hand it off to you.
Well, the novel started. It's based on one historical fact that I just played around with and changed some things and not others. The fact being that in 1857, Charles Dickens invited Hans Christian Andersen to visit him in the country. Dickens had just moved to the country about 25 miles southeast of London with his wife, his sister-in-law, and his 9 surviving children. And I guess Dickens was having what we would call now a midlife crisis, although no one knew what that was. And in a moment of desperation, he invited Hans Christian Andersen, who he'd met once. And it was always, I mean, I knew about this fact for a long time, and it was so amazing to me that these 2 writers with whom I just not only adore, but with whom I'm obsessed, were in the same place at the same time. So Anderson showed up, and he was invited to stay for a week or maybe 2 weeks, and he stayed for 5 weeks. And the visit was just a kind of disaster. I mean, Anderson hardly spoke English. Dickens's marriage was falling apart, and Dickens was in the process of falling in love with an 18-year-old actress, which also not good for the family. And so it's about the sort of stresses and the kind of strange things that occurred during those weeks. So the book is divided into sections, and the first one is written from the collective point of view of the 9 children. I mean, at first I thought I should pick one of the kids to write from, and then I thought, well, I'll just do all of them, because they ranged at age from 5 to 20. And the children know that something's going on. They know that something's happening with their parents, but they don't know what. they kind of blame everything on Anderson, who's come to visit and who's just in the way. And I mean, everywhere they want to be, he's already there. So that's the first section. The second is written from Dickens's point of view, and much of it is about this love affair, which in fact did happen with the actress who was starring in a play that he wrote. The third section is written from Hans Christian Andersen's point of view, and he again knows something's happening and understands that there are tensions in the household, but can't really figure out. And he's so awkward and ill at ease. I mean, Dickens is a very powerful, charismatic, popular writer, and Anderson is the opposite in every way. And then the final part, when Anderson finally leaves, he goes back to Europe and continental Europe and writes a fairy tale, which is the last section of the novel. And the fairy tale is made up of little elements. I mean, it's this kind of beautiful fairy tale, and also it was so thrilling and intimidating to be writing a fairy tale that Hans Christian Andersen would have written, except he didn't. And the fairy tale is made up of little elements that are all the awful, little, embarrassing, humiliating things that have happened to him during those awful 5 weeks. But they're turned into this kind of glorious, beautiful, inspiring fairy tale narrative, really. So I, a lot of it is about family. I mean, about children and family and parenthood and what it is to have a large family and how that feels. And then and marriage, of course. And then another part of it is how, something I think we're all interested in, how art gets made, how the little things that happen in life or big things that happen in life get transformed into a work of art, and how how the imagination works on reality to create something entirely new.
Oh yeah, it was gorgeous, and I'm so impressed by all the points of views, but seeing all of these kind of writing styles and nods to their work come through too, as well as this beautiful story. I mean, 5 to 20 is a big age range for someone to go through and kind of understand what's happening. So seeing it kind of a 360 view is really interesting. And yeah, I'm thinking, okay, well, what 2 authors would I want to move in and live with each other for 5 weeks? That's what I was thinking. Like, how funny would that be as a thought experiment? But I also it was wonderful. I think book clubs are going to have a lot to discuss on this, because it is different people's experiences and different people's thoughts on a situation. So thank you. And I have to apologize. I think I skipped a line in your bio, and I'm going to fix it, because that's what I get for copying and pasting. So I'm going to say, recipient of numerous grants and honors, including the Guggenheim and a Fulbright, a director's fellow at the Center for Scholars and Writers in the New York Public Library. Apologies if I messed that up. But thank you so much for telling us about it. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about the beautiful cover.
Well, I'll just say that it was designed by Danny Miller, who's a friend of my son. So, and I've known him since he was in the 7th grade. And for years we've been, we see each other at birthday parties and so forth. And for years I've been saying, Danny, you should design a book. So he did design 1974 and then this one, and he was a joy to work with.
I love that. And it's just so classic. It's beautiful. Okay. Well, I think that has kind of concluded everyone talking about their book. So come on. Thank you so much to everyone. And hey, everybody okay to come on? There we go. I just want to make sure everybody's stuff is working.
God,
okay.
Great comments in the chat. Lots of good things. People really excited to read everyone's books. Comment about how truth is always stranger than fiction. Isn't that just the way?
That could be a theme really for tonight, I feel.
I have a question for Danny. I want to start with. I think there's a huge gap for stories with protagonists that are older, and so I was wondering what made you want to write from the point of view of a 6-year-old about friendship and friendship breakups.
I think part of what felt important to me was that there felt like a sense of urgency when it came to time, and a sort of sense of, at most, I've got one or two more of these left in me. And also because I think that there's something especially in this character, at least, that has to do with like a fear of humiliation and a fear of degradation, and specifically feeling degraded by the end of a friendship. And to me, at least, that felt like something that was really connected to. Sometimes I think when people talk about, I recently got divorced, or I broke up after a long relationship, and I realized I was back on the dating market and so much has changed. And I wanted a sort of feeling like that for friendship. It's been a long time since I had to look around and find someone new. And I feel like the way that people make and begin friendships has changed now. And I no longer know how to catch someone's eye at a dinner party. I'm no longer at a stage in my life where like I have young kids or I'm post college and I'm meeting tons of new people. There's just this constant churn of new acquaintances coming in and out of my life. The people I know are the people that I know, and I don't meet many new people. So that felt important to me to get to do. And also I think someone who is sort of like in between my own generation and my own parents' generation. So it didn't feel like I was leaping too far ahead, but that felt like they had had more of a life than I myself had lived. That felt important. And especially like the name Barbara, like I spent a lot of time like with all the characters' names, really looking up like how likely would a person born in this year be to have this name. And so not everybody has like the, number 2 social security index common name, but for the most part, people are given generationally appropriate names. And so really thinking, I work in senior living as my day job. And so, there are a lot of, name trends that you start to see come up, and really feeling like, could a Barbara and a Caitlin ever be best friends? Like they're just, what do you have? I think age gap friendship, like people talk a lot about age gaps in romantic relationships, and thinking about so much changes in terms of like what's an acceptable way of talking to people or getting to know people, or what counts as a social blunder, and that changes so much from generation to generation. And so even some of what Barbara gets into with like when she talks about missing diet talk, and having lost that, I feel like that's a change that I've seen a lot in the last 15 years, and like that does change how you get to know people. So that's a long answer to your question.
No, it was a great answer. And can Barbara be friends with Caitlin, or can she even be friends with other Barbara? That was another thing I loved, is how you had Barbara and then you had other Barbara. It was just a really,
because in real life, sometimes you work with people and they both have the same name.
yeah. We have 2 Daniels, so it's,
There you go.
the same thing. And I love that, Barbara was one of those characters where like even if she is X amount of years older than you, there was so much to relate to, whether you want to relate to her or not. And that feeling of like looking for connection is kind of, timeless, regardless of our age. It kind of defies that. So yeah, it was a great answer. Thank you so much.
I'm thinking about at work, we have someone with the same name, and we'll say like name 1, name 2, and someone's like, why am I 1? I'm like, I literally met you first. That's the only reason for the 1 and 2. But that's really funny. Okay, so we have a question from our friend Beth Thomas for Christina. So, you write such wonderful historical fiction. Have you ever entertained the idea of writing a nonfiction work of pure history? And maybe we can kind of add that into the question I asked you before, because you have a thriller that just recently is, a new recent thriller. So you're kind of coming back to historical fiction. So
Yeah, that's great. I love that question. My father was a historian, and he was chair of the history department of the University of Maine for 30 years or something. I guess he was there for 30 years and was chair for much of that. But I never really thought that I had much in common with the kind of writing he did until a number of years into my own career, when I started really being interested in writing, sort of going back. And I stumbled into a story about the orphan trains. My husband's grandfather had ridden on one, and that novel was 2/3 of it was set in the present and a third was set in the past. And it's sort of, I dipped my toe into the past a little. I'd never really read historical fiction. I read contemporaneous fiction, meaning if I was going to read about the 19th century, I would read Jane Austen or Tolstoy. I was like, why would I want to read something written by someone today when I could read something written by someone in the time period? It makes no sense to me. So I came into it kind of backwards. It wasn't that I was a fan of the genre. It was that I realized there were stories to tell that could be explored in a different way. And so that was why I was saying I love that line about writing contemporary fiction set in the past, because I think that the period you're in informs your work, and to say that's not true is a lie, no matter what, always. And that there are interesting things we can see in the past today that are revelations born out of the experience of living in Trump's universe and in this world we live in. So not to get political, but it is a really interesting time to live in a tumultuous time. And I think for those of us who write, Faulkner said the past is never past, essentially. The past is never, not history, it's not even past. And it does feel that way, that when you write about past periods, there's so much that informs the way you think about the present. I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, yeah, it's good. And I mean, I don't know if Francine or Daniel writing nonfiction want to speak to any of that, of like everything kind of comes in the present when you're writing about history.
Yeah, I'll just mention, I always say I don't think I'm creative enough to write fiction, just because I've been working in journalism so long that I'm bound by what really happened. But what I often tell people at my book events is you can select what you want to include, and you don't have to write an 800 page, tome of everything that happened. The goal is to find these moments, find characters, find moments of tension and conflict, and build them like you would a story. And that mental challenge is great. Doing the citations and all of the bibliography at the end, Christina, I would think twice before signing up for nonfiction, only for that reason, because it's a lot. Yeah,
It's
it
a
takes
lot.
me about 2 months every book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, writing about the past, especially fiction, is such a great escape from the present, which I was which I was really looking for. But also it's like, I mean, at the end of my writing day, I was so immersed in the 19th century and what was happening that it was like waking from a dream, really. And it was like shocking that dinner was ready or that things were happening, and it's because I was so completely involved in the life. I mean, I felt as if I was living in this house with the 9 children and the Dickens and Anderson and all the things that were going on. So when I'm writing nonfiction, I'm very much me writing nonfiction, trying to get it right, trying to get the facts right, trying to organize things, telling that story. But this was something else. I was really not me for long periods of time.
Wow. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's funny because there was a comment, I guess, Daniel, when you put the diary up and said, I guess I'd give it away because I saw it. They said, give it back. Just a funny aside. But Renee wants to know about, this is an interesting question. And Christina, were any other twins not conjoined in the family?
No, and that is really interesting also. In fact, when the women were pregnant, there's a part of the book where the doctors thought that they would give birth to conjoined twins, and which is not easy to give birth to, among many other things. But they didn't know what would happen. And there were editorials in the New York newspapers in New York about, this abomination, and that it was against God's will, all kinds of things. I mean, it's such a crazy situation. First of all, that they met these sisters who agreed to marry a conjoined set of twins. It was illegal in the United States for them to even marry, but there was a loophole in North Carolina for various reasons that are part of a whole other bigger story. But it was so strange and unusual. It would be unusual today, but can you imagine in 1843 in North Carolina how unusual that was? So there were just a whole lot of kind of crazy things about the situation. And And the fact that they eventually had 21 children is even more crazy. So there was a lot of material. There were all these surprises along the way as well. You know, on some level, what led to seemingly conventional Southern ladies to marry in this way and put themselves into a situation that was so unconventional immediately, and yet they stayed in their communities. Strange, but fascinating.
I told you, this story was so fascinating that I was like, wait, what happened? You know, 20 years later, I was down a rabbit hole. It was so fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
And looking at photos, which I'm so glad you brought those photos because that's what I was Googling.
When I give presentations, I know, Daniel, you'll probably do this too, but there'll be a 30-minute presentation because there's just a lot to talk about, obviously. Yeah.
Daniel, I actually have a little bit of a self-indulgent question. I was a history major in college, and we were always talking about you know, digitization and how that's gonna affect us in the future. So, you know, when I was reading about like meticulous diary keeping with Washington and how we've all been kind of moving away from physical records in general, like how often do you know, you used to find so much by somebody's grocery list. How often do you even keep your grocery list now? And I think we're going to see this huge decline in diary keeping. How do you think that's going to affect the way historians do research in the future and conceptualize things now that we're dealing with digital things that are much more maybe much more easy to get rid of?
Yeah, a great question. And this question is at the heart of history writing because, in a way, things written on paper last. They last sometimes forever, or at least for decades or centuries. I don't write almost anything down. I keep a notebook and I write maybe once a week something, so I certainly don't keep the records of my life. However, if I was going to write a biography of someone who lived today and I was living maybe 50 years from now, if I could get access to their email records or their texts, those would be immeasurably richer than what George Washington or anyone wrote in their diary, you know, little snippets. We have so much more data and details on ourselves, but you're right, it can disappear. And that's sort of the nature of all history, is it can all disappear. Paper can burn in a library, as it has many times. Books can be lost, checked out, never returned, that sort of thing. And so preserving these things is really the work of archivists and librarians, who I owe my whole career to because I depend on their expertise and generosity of spirit, and they're always the most generous people. So I don't think biography writing or history writing at all is going away, that we don't write. I think it's evolving, like everything, and we have to evolve with it and find ways to preserve valuable material and be able to pick it out from all the noise in the future.
Thank you. I'm gonna pass it back to Lainey.
Sure. Yeah, I think that kind of made me think a lot, Francine, reading yours, talking about like writing now, but looking at the past and having all of these documents. Is there some kind of dissonance when you're writing of like, I'm an author writing about two authors in past, or I don't know. That was fascinating to think about for me.
Well, it was crazy intimidating to think that I could write from the point of view of Charles Dickens. I mean, it was, you know, or Hans Christian Andersen. But on the other hand, I was so immersed in their work and hearing their voices in my head. You know, I was interested when Daniel was talking before at the very beginning. He said, "And Tiny Tim, who did not die." I mean, that came up in his conversation, and I thought, well, yeah. I mean, Dickens is still so much a part of our lives. I mean, at Bard, every year at Christmas, the faculty reads A Christmas Carol aloud to a group of students. And every time we get to that line, and Tiny Tim, who did not die, just I burst into tears. And it's like Pavlovian by now. And it's sort of embarrassing because you don't really like to cry in front of your students. It's kind of demoralizing for everybody. But it did make me realize how present those writers were. And also, I mean, I at various points writing the book, I thought all of them, if they lived now, they would have a diagnosis of some sort. I mean, Hans Christian Andersen was clearly way on the spectrum. I mean, way on the spectrum. But they didn't have diagnoses, and they were just geniuses. So I just, held my breath and dove in.
Wow. Yeah, that's great.
Danny, I have a question for you. Well, I have two questions, and you can either answer, they're very different questions, actually. I'm looking at, I probably shouldn't even conjoin the two, but I'm gonna let you speak to what moves you more. So the cover of your book is so gorgeous. It's very like frame it in your house sort of gorgeous. Like if you cut the text or even if you pulled it away, Lainey, do you mind pulling that up if you have it on hand? No worries if not.
Yeah.
I would love to know like what the cover means to you, and the process of picking a cover, like how many iterations did you see? I don't know, this one really caught my eye. I remember when they first showed it to us during our meetings, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, I love this one. And, it is always a total luck of the draw thing if you get to have any input into your cover. For the most part, they say, here is the cover of your book. And you say, thank you, sir, may I have another? And that's about how it goes, which is fine, to be clear. I understand that is part of book publishing. So I often, my editor, Rakesh, I will send him at some point in the process a couple of like public domain images that have just been on my mind as I think about truly just like the experience of the cover. Not necessarily it has to have these elements, but just, this is something that I've had in mind. And more than other editors I've worked with, he's really collaborative on covers, which I'm very grateful for. And this, I think, might actually have been one of them that I sent. Again, because this takes so much of its cues from Nora Ephron, there's a lot of sort of like angrily listing recipes in the book, where she's like describing another sort of like failed encounter to like nourish another human being relationally. And it's just like, and by the way, I made something incredible and here it is, fuck you. And so, I wanted that sense of, again, like this is a character who takes real pleasure in food and in life. Like she is not exclusively a sort of joyless collection of crabbiness. And so I really wanted a cover that would both, have a sort of like image of like plenty and fastidiousness, like real attention to detail. Like she is a person who describes her clothes carefully and thoughtfully. She takes good care of her clothes. She's incredibly fastidious about her like gorgeous furniture. And she does have a real desire to connect with other people. She's also often quite bad at it, and she's often quite cruel, but in a way that she's willing to own and sort of take responsibility for. So I wanted, I think a lot about, the proverb, better a dinner of herbs where peace reigneth than a fatted oxen, and disputation. And the idea of, she's got wonderful things and a lot of busted up relationships. And so somebody like sitting down to a beautiful meal, not necessarily looking thrilled, not surrounded by excited, happy, pink-cheeked people. And so that was really something that was important to me. And the font just feels very like, this is the 2026 font that everybody gets, which again, I have no objection to. It's totally fine. I feel like, big blocky teal letters on public domain images is a big thing for the last couple of years, and I enjoy it. I have no problem with it. It's a great trend. I don't mind that this book will look like a book from 2026. And so I think that is roughly it. I don't remember off the top of my head the actual painter. I could find that out at some point, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love that. That was a great explanation of it too. I think it's so fitting. And yeah, it's a great cover. So thank you so much.
I also second that. Vacation is great.
Yeah.
Can I tell my favorite cover story?
Yeah.
So when I had finished Blue Angel and I was about to come out, I knew what I wanted, and we live very near the Great Strand bookstore in New York City. And I said to my husband, okay, go to the Strand. I want you to find a piece of vintage pornography with a teacher-student configuration. And he said, okay. And he was back in 15 minutes. He had found it. He had found the perfect thing. And then Harper, because they had a brilliant designer, managed to paste a sort of a little sticker that was like an exam book cover color on the kind of more pornographic part of the cover, so that it could be actually sold in bookstores and with with regular books. but I was so happy that Harper let us do this, and then it came out so well.
If you give me a second, I'll pull it up. Hold on. There we go. And then we'll have a visual. Yeah. Let me pull it up. Here we go.
Oh, there you go.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's a great cover.
And the design is beautiful.
I love
Wow.
it. We got asked a final question for all of you. Sylvia asked, she said, I'm curious who these authors read in their youth that possibly prompted their interest in writing. So whoever feels moved can start.
I'll say I grew up reading a lot of history. I love history. I still do. David McCullough, for me, was and remains the North Star. I mean, someone who took on extremely ambitious stories of real people, added a sense of drama through their own actions, through real events, and wrote it all on a typewriter. I mean, that alone is a detail to me that I love. So he's mine.
I'll just go next and say, I just wrote an essay about this, but Laura Ingalls Wilder, who, I think all of us who grew up in small towns and small places, I grew up in Maine, and the winters were long, and there was so much to relate to that family. And we read those books over and over when I was little, and they were, really resonant and interesting. The story is much more complicated than she put forth in those books, but they were wonderful to read as a child.
I still have my copy of Anderson's fairy tales from the 5th grade with my little 5th grade handwriting and the thing. And I took it with me. I remember we took a family trip across the country, family road trip. And I remember I read the whole time. I sat in the back seat and read. And I remember my father saying, can you look up, because this is the Grand Canyon? And I'd go like, okay. and then go straight back to the book. So
That's
yeah.
nice, I guess.
That's interesting.
Barbara Pym.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this. I feel like everyone, it was that's such a like levity. Like, let's end on this fun.
That was a great one.
Both because
Thank you.
she's, unimpeachable, and also because I was so jealous of how she's constantly getting like rediscovered as the most unappreciated writer. So it's always like, oh, she's so forgotten. Let's have another festival to celebrate how unforgotten she should be. So she's just like this perpetual beloved underdog. No one ever says, oh, she's been overexposed. Every 10 years, it's like the forgotten Barbara Pym. She's not forgotten at all. But I want that. I want that double whammy that she pulled off.
I love that.
That was great.
Was there anything before we wrap up, anything anyone wants to say that they didn't get to say? We're coming close to the end.
Great.
I'll say it. I have something in the oven that's starting to burn, so I want to go. I really enjoyed it.
What is
That's
it?
why
Yeah.
my timer went off like 10 minutes ago. It's potatoes. And
I
they
thought
can
you
bring
meant a
extra
book.
crispiness, but it's burning.
I thought you meant an idea, but yes.
It was lovely to talk to you all.
Thank you so much.
I hope your potatoes don't burn. Thank you.
I thought I meant a book. Okay, we're gonna say goodbye, but we just want to quickly tell our viewers that we have another wonderful episode. I'm gonna put all of the jackets up. I'm gonna say the titles and the on sale. So we have Daniel M. Lavery, Meeting New People, June 2nd. Christina Baker Kline, The Foursome, May 12th. Daniel Stone, Stealing George Washington, June 2nd. Francine Prose, 5 Weeks in the Country, May 5th. And next month, drum roll please, we have another great episode for you. Oh, not that way, this way. We have Meg Mitchell-Moore, Walter Mosley, and Melissa Albert. And we will have one other author for you, so stay tuned and check out all of our socials and our newsletter, because we will announce that very soon. But February 24th, mark the calendar. We'll see you here again. And I just want to say the biggest thank you to all of our authors. This was fantastic. I could stay here all night listening to all of your stories.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
hosting
guys.
this and
Thank
for
you.
for promoting books, as we all hope to do in the world. So
And thank you,
for writing.
librarians, too.
Yeah, we love librarians. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Thank you.